this oral history project has, over the past 3 years, has been one of the greatest experiences of my professional and personal life, which I hope by the end of our time together you'll understand why that's true for me. So I want to first give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of soul injury, which is a really cool and I think appropriate name for what so many, especially combat veterans, experience. I did not come up with it. A lot of what I'm going to describe, it's based on my experience, but it's also filtered through a woman named Deborah Grassman, who was the director of hospice for the VA for 30 years and has a really wonderful set of resources I'll introduce you to at the end of our conversation together. She came up with the concept of soul injury to describe what so many combat veterans are confronted with at the end of life. And now we can help them heal that soul injury so they have a more peaceful dying process. We're going to talk a little bit about the warrior archetype in our culture and how that plays out in the way these veteran clients and patients see themselves at the end of life. We're going to talk about the culture of war and how to integrate that combat experience so that they're able to die more peacefully. And then also for you all, practical tips to help you make that connection. When I go to conferences, I have to be doing something. I'm not a very good sitter and listener, which is, you're probably figuring out a bad quality for a counselor, so I've had to work with that. I'm a good doodler, and I love to take notes. So if you are a note taker and that helps you pay attention, please do. I'm happy to also share this with Celine after we talk. So if you prefer not to take notes and you just want to hang out and enjoy yourselves, that's great too. I'll make sure you get a copy of this. So whatever works best for you works for me. So my project started with this handsome fellow right here. This is my grandfather, John Briggs, who died in hospice care in 2004. And his death was actually my first exposure to hospice. For about 6 months, he died in the home, and for about 6 months, his home care aide came and assisted him with oxygen and morphine in particular toward the end. We think he had pancreatic cancer, but we'd never had it officially diagnosed nor any surgery because he was 92 and he was ready to die. He didn't want to prolong that, so he chose not to have any treatment for his cancer. My grandfather, my dad's an only child, I'm an only granddaughter, and he was an enormous part of my growing up years. They lived in Reedsville, I grew up in Roanoke, so we spent every holiday with these guys. And I knew my grandfather as like a contemporary of Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. I kind of figured he played golf with them. He had like white hair and he wore like natty sweaters, and he was always really well dressed, and he was very funny, an amazing storyteller, incredibly gracious and kind, and always happy to see me. So I grew up with this amazing role model of grace and good humor and generosity. He died in 2004, and then my grandmother, who also died in hospice care in 2013, after she died, we were clearing out their house, and we found this big box full of my grandfather's things from World War II. I'd seen this picture, which is what a lot of us see from folks who served in wars. Like they're very handsome, or her very handsome, very attractive professional photograph. But my grandfather never talked about the war very much, except to make it sound like summer camp. It was like they played golf in Switzerland and they played practical jokes on each other, and it all sounded like a lot of fun. So I grew up kind of thinking that war must be a really great thing to get involved in. I didn't really understand what he went through, and even as an adult, even when I intellectually knew better, I still didn't know better. So when we found all of his things, I started finding pictures like this one. That's him, the second from the left. Oh, it's the telephone. I thought I was hearing voices. I didn't know what was it does happen. So my grandfather served in an armored division in Europe. He went over to Europe as a replacement troop in late 1944. Just in time for the Battle of the Bulge, and if you're not a historian, the Battle of the Bulge was the largest assault, counter-assault from the Germans during World War II. It was incredibly deadly, it was incredibly violent, and it was fought in like minus 40-degree temperatures in Belgium. It was very savage, and he showed up just in time for that. This picture was taken, judging by the trees, sometime in early 1945, after that battle was over. And what I notice when I see this picture is that they look kind of rough. I noticed that my grandfather's holding a cigarette. I never knew him to smoke. I also noticed, you can't quite see it here, but if you look really closely, I have the original one, if I look at it with a magnifying glass, there's swastikas on the guns and swords in between them. These were souvenirs they took off of dead soldiers, and they would steal from houses. And this was a really common practice, especially for American soldiers. We are notorious for taking souvenirs. So when I found pictures like this, I felt like I'd been handed a mystery about a person I thought I knew, and I wanted to understand it better. So that led me to my oral history project. I started seeking out World War II vets in Winston-Salem that would be willing to share their story with me. And I'm going to introduce you to just a few of my favorite folks here. This is Jules Spock, who was my very first recorded interview. Once I started doing these interviews, my goal was 10, and I just wanted to understand my grandfather better. Once I got started, I realized that these histories were dying at a really rapid rate. We were losing them. We were losing these really individual stories of what it means to leave home and go into battle and come home again, and how you heal from that. And I wanted to capture those stories while I still had a chance. So I borrowed an audio recorder from a museum in my town called the New Winston Museum, which is an oral history museum, and I started recording them. I got involved in the We Honor Vets program with hospice and palliative care in Winston-Salem. I started making friends at retirement communities and going to veterans events. And now, 3 years later, this has become like the thing that takes up all the time when I'm not working or doing other things. And I love it. It's been one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And I've learned a lot about how to have a good life and how to have a good death from these people. I'm 45, and all my grandparents lived past 90. So, God willing, I got a long time. But I'm halfway done. And I'm kind of aware of that more and more, that I'm about halfway done, if I'm lucky. So what does that mean? What do I want the second half of my life to look like? And so a lot of what I've learned about how I want to live, I've learned from these guys and from these women. I will also want to explain why I chose the title Soldier's Heart. It plays a lot into what I'm going to talk about today, about how to talk to combat veterans at the end of life. Most of you, I'm sure all of you are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder, with that diagnosis. Well, PTSD was originally called Soldier's Heart. That was the first name for it. So after the Civil War, these soldiers were coming back, and they were anxious, and they were upset, and they couldn't sleep, and they were hypervigilant. They couldn't put the war away, and they didn't know what to call it. They didn't know what this thing was. So doctors came up with this term soldier's heart because it involved a rapid heart rate. But I think it's a much more poetic way of describing what PTSD is. PTSD is very clinical, right? It's kind of out here. Soldier's heart is right here. So I like to talk about soldier's heart and what it means to have a soldier's heart, and how do we help heal that heart as our soldiers are dying. So this whole idea of soul injury, as I mentioned, that was created by Dr. Grassman. I was thinking about how to describe this, and so one metaphor that came up, have y'all seen The Empire Strikes Back? Have you guys seen this movie? So there's a scene, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to describe it to you in very close detail, so it's like you're going to have been there. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker is training to be a Jedi Knight. He's training to be a warrior, right? And as a part of his training, he goes to Yoda, who is his mentor, to learn how to be a warrior. And at one point, Luke has to go into this cave, in this dark cave underground, and face his fears. He has to face evil. So he goes down this spooky cave, and out of the shadows comes Darth Vader, right? And Luke pulls out his lightsaber, and he's ready to fight. And pretty quickly, he just cuts off Darth Vader's head, really quickly. And the head rolls on the ground, and Luke is looking at it. And as he looks at it, the mask falls away, and he sees his own face. So he realizes that behind that mask was him all along. Many veterans toward the end of life, and I see these guys pretty shortly before you do. So a lot of the veterans I've interviewed are right at the very end of life, and a lot of them are looking into that darkness, looking into that shadow, and they're seeing themselves. The war is not out there, the war is always in here, and they brought it home with them, and they're trying to find some level of reconciliation, some moral reckoning for what they saw, what they experienced, and most importantly, what they did while they were in combat. Some of what I talk about today does also apply to non-combat veterans. There was a woman recently who served stateside during the Vietnam War. She was a helicopter medic. And I don't know what happened to her, but she called me 2 days before the interview, and she said, my PTSD has really kicked in. I have an anxiety attack. I can't talk to you about this. I will probably never know what happened to her, but she was stateside. She was not in combat, and she still has that level of trauma. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about really applies mostly to combat veterans, but not necessarily. It's good not to assume that just because someone served during peacetime, they didn't have some sort of traumatic experience. It may have even been something like assault or sexual assault. Those kinds of things can leave a war trauma just as much as combat can. But for veterans who are really struggling at the end of life, they may have what we call soul injury. And it's this idea that primarily unmourned grief for the people they lost, people that they knew, they were friends with, people that died, even the enemy that died in their presence, if they were a medic, people they were unable to save. Unforgiven guilt and shame is often a big trigger for that soul injury. You'll notice a disruption in their personal identity. They kind of shrink. There might be a lot of anger, there might be a lot of tension, there might be a real flat affect or a lack of engagement in life. People that sort of watch TV all the time and smoke and drink beer, that's a real restricted affect. These are not people that are fully enjoying life. And that oftentimes for veterans is a sign that they have this soul injury piece. A feeling of betrayal by another person, by God, by the Army, by the United States. They may be carrying a lot of bitterness for how they were treated before, during, or after war. And finally, just a profound sense of emptiness, like a sense of loss. And that emptiness is often their disconnect between their true selves and the part of themselves they've cut off because they don't want to feel that pain. Like, I'm just not going to deal with them. I stick it in a box that's not going to be near me anymore. So that's where that emptiness can really come from. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different cultures of war, but I think this war, this letter, D-Day, the anniversary of D-Day was on the 6th this week, and this is the letter that Eisenhower sent out to the troops before they took off on D-Day. And one of the things I love about it is just the language of it. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. This language is full of integrity, it's full of courage, it's full of passion. There's sort of a moral code to it, you can really hear that. But for a lot of veterans, the reality of what they experienced in combat is very different from that. There's almost a divorce from that moral code. And when there's a lack of a morality, a lack of a sense of integrity in what they're doing, that's when they become, that soul injury really sets in. They feel like the moral code of the Army, the moral code of the United States, their own personal moral code has been violated in some way, and it's really hard to rectify that. It takes a lot of inner work to come home and find healing through that. It's not just the physical injury necessarily, it's that sense that the best of me was denigrated, the best of me was disparaged, the best of me was not honored. So this language is beautiful, and this is what a lot of people that sign up for the military expect to experience, and sometimes they find it lacking for them. So this whole idea of the warrior archetype, every culture in history has had a warrior. My friend Bill is in the Marines, and he's retired from the Marines, he's a retired captain. And he describes his interpretation of being a warrior as someone who sets a boundary. So someone who draws a line around the vulnerable, someone who sets a boundary of safety, someone who sets a boundary of courage. And so people that really embrace the warrior identity, and this is typically people who choose to enlist in the military, not necessarily been drafted, they really value these virtues. And these are powerful things: heroism, stoicism, self-sacrifice. There's a real sense of service, of honor, of integrity, of stepping out and doing something for others. These are often the values that draw people into the military. And they can be really powerful catalysts for acting with integrity, for doing noble things, for going above and beyond. This is what most of us as humans, this is what we want. We want to get to the end of our lives and feel like we did things that were heroic, that we showed up and we were the best possible version of ourselves. And the warriors take that one step beyond. They're willing to die for what they believe in, literally to die. And I think most of us, I know that's not something that I've ever felt comfortable saying. So it's an archetype in our culture that I think really, it's both simultaneously kind of intimidating, but it's also inspiring. In the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln talked about the soldiers who died in the Civil War as giving their full measure of devotion. And people that really embrace the military lifestyle, they want to give their full measure of devotion to the Army, to the Navy, to the country, to us, right? These are the virtues. But just like in Empire Strikes Back, there's shadows. This is the shadow. Stoicism is on both of those lists. There are times in life when stoicism is really helpful. We sort of draw into ourselves, we get focused on a task, we get rid of the drama, and we just do it, right? And then we don't make a big thing about it, we just move on after. We've all been in situations where we've had to call out that part of ourselves. But for veterans who are dying, stoicism can really be a trap because it keeps them stuck in an emotional quagmire that they need to process and deal with, and it makes it challenging to access that. Other shadows are the mercenary or the soldier of fortune. This is killing for money or killing for a prize of some sort or killing for a reward versus going out and serving, which is a totally different field. The warrior shadow, when there's a disregard for morality and ethics, the warrior becomes state-sanctioned murder instead of a soldier. And that's a very different field. Killing for the sake of killing. For many veterans who have been in an experience of extreme violence, there's a line that gets crossed where they move from sort of the warrior virtue into the warrior shadow. And one example I'll give is a man named Pete, who I interviewed. He's died since. When I went in to interview him, it was at a retirement community in Winston-Salem, and the woman who invited me to come interview him said, "Oh, you're gonna love Pete. He was at D-Day, and he was all through the war. He has these great stories. You're just gonna love talking to him." So I was really looking forward to it. I thought, wow, this just sounds powerful. And Pete had started to get a little bit of dementia. So that cognitive box he had built around his experiences in World War II was starting to kind of drop down a little bit, which I know that you all notice with your patients too. Dementia and Alzheimer's starts to break down that cognitive framework. So I sat down with my reporter, and Pete's sitting there, and when I listen to it, I have on my radio voice. I'm like, "This is Pete, and this is the date. And hi, Pete, how are you today? Tell us about." And he immediately begins crying, and not just tearing up. He is sobbing. He is tears and snot and crumpled face. And the first thing out of his mouth is, "Please don't judge me for what I've done. Please don't judge me for what I've done. Please don't judge me for what I've done." And then he said to me, "I never took a prisoner." He was 17 when he landed on the beaches of Normandy. He was of Polish descent, and he spoke fluent Polish. His parents were from Poland. He fought all the way through Europe into the absolute, utter horror of Germany in 1945, where everything was falling apart and the Germans were just murdering everyone they could see, and vice versa. And then he helped liberate concentration camps, his Polish brothers and sisters, and he never took a prisoner. He shot every German he saw, even if they were surrendering. Every chance he got, he shot a German at 17. How do you deal with that? Like, what do you do with that? So after a lifetime of putting that in a box, he was feeling it. And he had that soul injury, he had that shame and the guilt for what he had done, and he did not know where to put it and how to talk about it. And it was one of the most painful interviews I've done. But I think being able to express it to someone and having us not turn away from him was helpful to him at the end of life. He could see that people could take it and hold it and not abandon him when he told the truth. There are far too many conflicts for me to name. I went to a veterans coffee the other day where we listed all the conflicts like Kosovo and now I'm just blanking on any additional ones, but all the different ways that our military have been engaged in the world. Somalia is another example. All these different conflicts throughout the world that weren't wars, but were named and were significant. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through all of them, although they're all worthy of discussion. So I'm going to talk about the three major conflicts that you're going to be seeing as folks reach the end of life, and just talk about how the different cultures of them really impacted and will impact the way that people process their death and dying. The first is World War II. So World War II is called the Good War in history. World War II was not publicized on TV. And in fact, the United States government was very careful about what kind of images got out to the public because they really wanted to have the public support for the war. 16 million Americans served in World War II, so it was an enormous percentage of the population. And everybody back home was doing something about it. So people, women went into the factories, people became nurses, they planted victory gardens, they collected metal and rubber to donate to the armed services. So there was a sense of collective unity with World War II that hasn't existed in any other war since. This was the last time we really all came together in that way. It was that big. This picture is a great example of how carefully constructed the image of the war was to kind of keep up our spirit for it. And which is one reason why I continue to romanticize it today. I think that's a common thread in our culture. So my friend Buddy was actually present when this very iconic photograph was taken. And so when MacArthur got driven out of the Philippines, he was like, I shall return. And so they come up in the boats toward the end of the Pacific War, and he's going to stride up into the Philippines and reclaim his status in the world. And so Buddy was up on the beach on the other side of the camera with a whole bunch of other Navy and Marine guys who had already been there for 6 weeks. And they were all just laughing their heads off because here comes MacArthur. And they're like, we're already here, sir, And they had to do this like 3 times to get the photo just right. So I love this story, and Buddy loves telling it. It's hilarious. But this is what was being given to the American people, really this unified sense of strength and purpose in the world. But underneath that, there was a whole lot else going on. So I think with World War II veterans, just like with that when I described with Pete, it's really good not to assume that they all feel great about it, because not all of them do. There's another World War II veteran named Chris that I've talked to, who is the antithesis of everything Tom Brokaw ever wrote about the Greatest Generation. Chris is pissed off, he hates the government, he thinks the military is stupid. When I asked him why he joined up, he said, because we were poor and I wanted 3 meals a day and a place to sleep. I didn't have that at home, so I joined the Army. And he was in the infantry all through Europe and had a horrible experience and has very active PTSD today at 92. It's very intense for him. He goes to a support group and counseling, and he will never put it down. The war will never end for him. So it's really good not to assume that every World War II veteran came out of that feeling positive about the experience. There's a whole lot more going on than we often see in books and movies about that war. So the Korean War it was actually started about 5 years after World War II ended. And it's often called the Forgotten War because it's actually the Korean conflict. It's actually not a war. I label it a war because people that were in it were like, no, it was a war. They feel very strongly about that. 33,000 soldiers died, and over 169,000 were killed, wounded, or missing in action, prisoners of war. It's a significant number of people who suffered through it, and it was also fought in just incredibly horrible conditions, like bitter, bitter cold. It was a very tough experience. This photograph I pulled off the internet, and this is a picture of a medic whose Jeep has just hit a bomb, hit a landmine, and it's blown up, and he's just overcome with sadness about it. Culturally speaking, in the United States, Americans were just tired of war. We were exhausted by it. We just come out of World War II. We didn't really want to hear about it. The economy was booming. So it was really easy just to kind of get on with your life and pretend like all of this wasn't happening. So Korean War veterans didn't come home to parades like World War II veterans did. And also the Korean War didn't really have an end in the way that World War II did. World War II resulted in Japan and Germany basically giving up. The North Koreans never really gave up. They created an armistice that was basically like a peace agreement, but it wasn't a surrender. And in fact, the final agreement took 2 years to hammer out. So there wasn't that sense of ending. There wasn't a sense that this had that strong moral purpose. So Korean War veterans kind of came back feeling overlooked, and a lot of them continue to talk about that. That's still really present for them today. And then, of course, there's Vietnam, which I think is probably the poster child for how war can go bad and can turn sour for us. The Vietnam War was the first war that really occurred live on TV, and so we saw all of it. We were not shielded from the ugliness of it. We weren't shielded from the horror of it. We weren't shielded from the incredibly difficult situations our soldiers were in, and the mistakes that really adolescent young men made. Very bad things happened, but very bad things happened in World War II as well. We just didn't see it. So the Vietnam War lasted actually over 20 years. 1955 to 1975 was the full duration of the war, even though we didn't participate in the whole thing. It was the first war that involved guerrilla warfare. Vietnam veterans will talk about children being used as weapons. So a kid would come up looking like he was asking for candy, but he was actually booby-trapped to explode. So imagine being a 19-year-old kid and you see that. You know, you're used to being friendly with kids. Our American soldiers are known throughout the world as like the candy givers. I hear that all the time from soldiers and from civilians alike, that the Americans had candy. And this is what they did to create community with people. And suddenly these children are being used as weapons against them. How do you internalize that? How do you deal with that? The war was never won. 58,000 soldiers were killed during that war, and they came back to shame and ridicule. Every Vietnam veteran I've interviewed, whether or not they're at peace with their service, we'll talk about being spit on at the airport, we'll talk about leaving their uniform and their suitcase and wearing their civilian clothes off the plane. Another big piece that significantly exacerbates the duration of trauma is the way people came home. So when my grandfather left Germany, he got his notice like sometime in November of 1945 that it was time for him to go home. So then like in a series of long steps, he made it to the coast of France, and they had like this 10-day boat ride home. And then he like went through a processing camp for several weeks, and then he was finally discharged like probably 3 or 4 months after he received his initial notice. Vietnam veterans, they served their year, and 24 hours later, they're sitting in their living room. There's not that time to process what's happened and really decompress. It's instantaneous. And for veterans, a big aspect of their healing is whether or not they come home to a supportive community or whether they come home to one that isn't supportive. And because Vietnam was so socially denigrated, and also because it involved fewer of us than World War II did, a lot of these soldiers didn't have that emotional support when they got home, so they boxed it up, put it away. A lot of them started drinking. A lot of them got depressed, but they didn't have anyone to talk to about what had happened for them, even in a social or informal way. So thinking about all this, you can see how these 3 different types of experiences can complicate the dying process. You can imagine the kinds of things that people are carrying with them toward the end of life, and how difficult that is to put down. Like how do you process through that? A lot of veterans are scared to talk to you about what they did or saw, because they're afraid you're going to turn away from them, you'll abandon them, you'll be disgusted by them, you'll be afraid of them. They're afraid of it because they're afraid they'll be so overwhelmed by the emotion they won't ever come back from it. So there's a lot of barriers to really sharing what they've experienced in combat. So I'm going to summarize a little bit about what I've noticed with the different types of veterans I've talked to. Many of the veterans I've talked to have pretty well integrated their combat experience into their sense of themselves. Veterans who say yes to talking to me are usually feeling pretty okay. Like I said, if a veteran doesn't feel comfortable sharing their story, that's when I get a no. So people that have integrated the combat experience, they're typically at peace with the concept of dying. They don't fear death. I actually did an interview just yesterday with a Vietnam veteran who is incredibly well integrated. He just has found a real spiritual path to approaching his experience in Vietnam. And he had a really hardcore experience. He was a Cobra helicopter driver, pilot, which I just learned about yesterday. This was anybody familiar with the Cobra? Have you seen this thing?
It's like a tank in the air.
It's like a tank in the air. It is wicked looking. But so he was responsible for a lot of deaths. He's a very moral man and a very spiritual man. And he has really done his work to find integrity with this. And what he said to me was, I almost died many times. I am not afraid of death. And he says it with a smile on his face, like, I'm not afraid. It's all good. Like, he's all right with it. When he gets to that point, he's going to be okay. He feels grace that he's alive. He feels like by living a good life, I'm honoring all my friends who didn't get to. That's integration. That's what that looks like. A sense that I'm here, I'm lucky, and I got to make the most of it. I feel like that's how my grandfather was. He really came back ready to live his life. Some veterans have this appearance of being integrated. They're kind of fine. You know, Deborah Grassman, her work calls us the white knucklers. I used to be an addiction counselor, so we'd say that about people that weren't using but weren't really doing real well. So they're kind of white knuckling through life. I interviewed a veteran another Vietnam veteran who personifies this perfectly. We had a 2-hour interview. He talked about his experience in Vietnam. He was very calm about it. He seemed to sort of have worked through it pretty well. And when I turned off the recorder, he said, "Is that off?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is it really off?" And he made me show it to him. And then I put it away, put it in my bag. And I said, "What's up?" He said, kind of leans in and his eyes get red. And this is the only emotion he showed. He said, "I killed people. And that's a mortal sin. And I know when I get to the pearly gates, God's not going to let me in." And I just sat there like, God, what do I do with this? So I said, "Have you talked to a minister about this?" He said, "Yes, I did." So this is what he believes, and when he got back, the minister reinforced it for him, basically. And the look on his face, and he was done with church at that point. That was it. His wife is Catholic. She can go. He's not having any part of it. Because he is afraid when he talks to a minister about it, he's going to hear that he's going to hell. And he's very convinced of it. Using your past experiences with other veterans, if you've had them, could be a conversation starter. Like, you know, I knew a veteran who was in Germany at the end of World War II, and he saw some really hard things. I wonder if you saw some really hard things when you were there. And that opens that door a little bit. It also lends you some credibility. You've sat with the story before. The other piece I use a lot is humor. So I've had several naval veterans complain about the powdered eggs they would eat on the ship. So I would say, okay, my friend Whitty, who was a cook on a ship, said that no one would eat the powdered eggs. Were they really that bad? Oh, they were terrible. And this becomes so tell me about your life on the ship. What was that like? And now we've got a story going. So past experiences and humor can really help open that door and get them rolling on their story. Deborah Grassman suggests this question sequence for new patients that you may not know very much about. Have you ever served in the military, or what branch of service were you in? Is a great way to initiate that conversation. And then she uses this language, have you ever served in a dangerous duty assignment versus have you ever served in a war? Because again, a lot of people didn't serve in war, but they saw some really dangerous stuff. So checking in to see if that's a possibility for them. And then you probably saw and experienced different and difficult things. Are there any memories that are bothering you now? And I love this, especially for you folks working in hospice, because there's almost like you're at a doctor's appointment quality to it. Like, are you having any symptoms right now? Are there any memories that are bothering you right now? Kind of opens it up as, I'm looking at you as a whole person, and I want to know if this in particular might be troubling for you, and if you want to talk about it. So this is a really gentle way to kind of open what can be a very difficult door. The other thing I recommend is asking about how they make meaning of their experience. So what did that mean to you? Or what did you make of that? Are really helpful questions to get to that meaning. Never ask why. Why? Because that makes us defensive. If I said, why'd you wear that shirt today? Maybe I'm just asking, but we all take like, what was wrong with my shirt? Like there's a sense of judgment to that. And that's just an automatic thing almost all of us do. Why feels like judgment. And if we knew why, we wouldn't be suffering. So oftentimes the answer to why is, I don't know. And that can feel very frustrating. So asking, what does that mean to you? What did you make of that? Is a gentle way to get to that why without creating that defensive posture. Also, I love backdoor questions. So for example, like the thing about the powdered eggs. I interviewed a World War II veteran named Phil who had a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. He had seen some really heavy duty stuff. He was stationed in Northern Africa and Italy. And we were an hour into the interview, and all he talked about was like driving Jeeps in England before and after the war. And so we get around Italy, and he'd say, oh, saw some tough stuff in Italy. But then when I was in England, gosh, I tried this beer, and I could tell there was something there, and I didn't want to push him, but I felt like he was leading me to the door and then just kind of not quite walking through it. So I kept asking really gentle questions. And so one question I asked was, did you have any close friends in the military when you were serving in the Army? And he said, yeah, when I was in Italy, my best friend got blown up beside me. And now we're there. Now he's opened that door, and I just kind of sat and I waited. And he said a little bit more about that, and then he moved away from it. And that's okay. He doesn't have to stay there, but I felt that he wanted to say something to me about it. I just had this sense that we were getting there and circling it. And then once he said it, he seemed more at peace. He was able to kind of relax a little bit more because he got the really hard stuff out. I also like to ask if they carried a lucky charm with them, like a rabbit's foot or a four-leaf clover or a cross or something that was significant to them. That can also be an entree into bigger stories or more difficult things. Like one time it saved me XYZ. A couple other pieces. Never force it, just make space for it. And I've really found one of the most helpful things for me to use is silence. So, for example, when Phil told me about his friends getting his legs blown off, I'm done talking at that point. I'm going to sit, and we're going to be quiet together for as long as that needs to happen. And I will wait for him to say the next thing. And maybe he'll say more about that experience, and maybe he'll change the subject. Either one is fine. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But when they go to that darkness, when they go to that dark place, just get really, really still. And stay with them and be present for whatever comes after that. The man I interviewed yesterday, the Vietnam veteran, I asked him one question, and we talked for an hour and a half. I asked one question, and he was gone. And we both spent the hour and a half alternately tearing up with his stories because it was just evoking so much emotion. So when they're ready to open that door, you don't have to do a lot of work. You don't have to be Inspector Clouseau or Columbo. It's not an investigation. You're just creating the space and opening the door. And when they feel that they're safe with you, it will happen. It will happen very naturally. Details are not that important. A lot of veterans I know will say to me, did what I had to do. And they'll look at me and there'll be a tear or a redness of the eye. And that tells the whole story. I don't have to go in there like, well, what do you mean? What's that mean? What'd you do next? Where were you when that happened? None of that's important. The veteran saying to me, I did what I had to do, and having an emotional response with me is what they need for healing. The details are not that important. Details can be helpful in the start of the story, like, well, tell me where you served and what were the dates and what branch of service you were in. But once they're really in it, you can kind of let that go. Don't feel like you have to have the full story to really give them that cathartic experience. Do not use platitudes to make them feel better. I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one. But when I train counselors, one of the first things they want to do is take away someone's pain. So if a faux client, when they're doing their mock sessions, will say, God, I just feel like my dad never loved me. Oh, of course your dad loved you. Daddies love their daughters. That's not true. That just feels horrible. It's so dismissive. And it really is more about, in that case, it's more about that counselor being uncomfortable than it is about helping the client. So don't try to reassure, don't try to sympathize, don't try to make it better, don't try to take away the pain. Nothing you can do can remove that pain. It's not surgery. All you can do is make space for it and give them a chance to let go of it. You can't take it away. So the best thing to do, again, is just to be really quiet, to be really patient with it. And I will always, yesterday when I interviewed this Vietnam veteran at the end, I said to him, I want you to know how much this has meant to me and how much it means to me that you trusted me with this story, and I really honor and value that. I just really try to speak what it has been like for me to be with them, because it really is almost like and I know you all know this, there's like an end-of-life confession piece to it, and it's powerful stuff. And then finally, they are often seeking forgiveness for guilt and shame. You can acknowledge that that's what they're looking for. I'm hearing that you're feeling a lot of guilt. I'm hearing that you feel very ashamed of that. You can speak it out loud. They already know it. You speaking it doesn't hurt them. It helps them to understand what they're feeling better. Deborah Grassman talks about praying with her clients. I think that's a personal choice, and it's definitely an institution choice. Not everybody may be comfortable with that, but she talks about actually doing a prayer of forgiveness with clients. She also does some ceremonial work around clients to help them have a sense of forgiveness and peace, which I think can be really helpful. Other things that can really help open that door, and I'm so glad you're a part of the We Honor Vets program, doing things like pinning ceremonies, having a certificate, having a flag for them, making something out of the fact that they were a veteran helps them to see that you are willing to acknowledge that piece of them. And that makes it much more likely for them to share some of their experiences with you. So this is Deborah Grassman's last words, and she says this very passionately at the end of her video. I'm going to give you her website in a minute, and I mentioned this to Celine as well. She has a DVD and a video online called Wounded Warriors, which is sort of encapsulating her 30 years as director of hospice for the VA. It's really wonderful. At the end of that video, she says this, I paraphrased it, but this is what she says very strongly, that it is our job to be present for them, to accept them as they are. And if we are uncomfortable with what they're saying, that's our problem, that's not theirs. And she's like, you cannot abandon people. This is their last chance for a peaceful death. This is it at the end. And so she really stresses this need for us to actively go in with this intention of helping them have a more peaceful dying process. My last words are take care of yourselves. Man, I've had a crazy week, and it's been really intense. And I've had a lot of emotional stuff going on with vets. There was the whole thing with a lost kitten in my neighborhood. I will not get into that. It was so stressful. Kitten's fine now, but man, it's like 2 days of stress. And as I was driving up here, I was thinking, like, what do I really want to communicate to you? You do, and I do, we do some of the most noble and important work on earth, and is largely unacknowledged. Most people do not want to talk about death. And look at all us, like, we're death Sherpas, like we're helping people get there, right? They're climbing the Mount Everest, and we're doing that, and it is so hard. Please take care of yourselves. I'm going to a baseball game tonight with my boyfriend and my mom and my friend Barb, and I'm gonna eat a hot dog, and I'm gonna drink a Coke, and I'm gonna look at the blue sky, and I'm not thinking about Vietnam for the rest of the weekend, right? We all need to step out of the war zone. We have to step off of Mount Everest and just be living human beings. And I said at the start of this that some of the greatest lessons about life that I've learned from veterans. And I'm sure you all hear this. I hear it all the time. I just wish I could blank again. I wish I could dance. I wish I could date girls. I wish I could travel. I wish I could breathe without assistance. I wish I could visit my family. I wish I could walk. They just want to feel alive in their bodies, one more time, and they miss that so much. And so no matter where you are in life, we're all like living and breathing. We're out here, we're talking to each other, we're functioning. You can all see me, I think, and we can all hear each other, and this is powerful. And so, like, be in your body and enjoy what you have now while you have it. I think that's what they would want for us. They want us to have a good and healthy and amazing life because they're at the end of it, and we have a chance to carry that on. All of them fought so we could have a good time. All of them fought so we could go to baseball games. So do that, do it in their honor. I think it's the best thing you can do. So with that, this is my contact information. Opus Peace is Deborah Grassman's website. I really encourage you to check it out. She also has great resources for doing ceremonial work with clients. She has a bunch of really cool handouts for doing different kind of processing with clients. One thing she talks about, for example, is a scaling exercise. So like if a veteran with some PTSD is saying they're like at a 7 of intensity, you can ask, well, what does it take to get you down to a 6? What do you need? So it helps them identify what specifically you can do to help alleviate some of that tension. All that's on her website. It's all free. So she's pretty amazing. So check that out. I think you'll really enjoy it. Just want to thank you for your time. Thank you all so much. And thank you for what you do.